Finance demands bold personalities. That's what my brother Ethan told me when he ended our partnership. Just like that. For 23 years, I built Vanguard Wealth Partners, only for him to sever our ties with a handshake and polished corporate rhetoric. My name is Daniel Vaughn. I'm 41, and until last week, I was the senior partner at the investment firm my father founded in our garage back in 1987. Ethan, 39, 2 years my junior, has always carried himself like the chosen successor. Dad often said Ethan possessed the ruthless edge needed for high-stakes finance. Me? I was the reliable one. The one clients entrusted with their nest eggs and their children's education funds. Ethan had been plotting this move for months. Ever since Dad announced he'd step back from daily operations, Ethan started maneuvering. He brought in 2 external investors, revised the partnership terms, and held meetings I wasn't invited to. The signs were clear, but I stayed focused on my work. 2 decades of client relationships don't vanish just because your younger brother gets ambitious. On the morning he summoned me to the boardroom, I knew what was coming. Ethan sat behind Dad's old desk, radiating confidence in a suit worth more than most people's monthly paychecks. The 2 investors stood by him like sentinels. "Daniel, we need to discuss your future role," he began. I sat in the same chair where I delivered my first client pitch 15 years ago. The leather was smooth from years of anxious executives sitting there, hoping we'd rescue their businesses from collapse or grow their family legacies for future generations. "The firm's shifting gears," Ethan went on. "We're diving into bolder strategies, crypto investments, high-risk derivatives, venture capital deals. It takes a certain mindset." He paused, waiting for a reaction. I gave him none. "You're great with cautious clients, Daniel, but that's the old market. Today's wealth creators chase growth, not security." I saw where this was going, but I let him finish his rehearsed speech. After 23 years of partnership, he couldn't even offer me the dignity of candor. He cloaked it in business jargon and market trends. When he finally got to the part about ending my role, I stood and offered my hand. "I understand," I said. "Boldness can pay off." Ethan shook my hand, likely expecting resistance or an argument. Instead, I walked out of that boardroom and started dialing. He had no clue what he'd just set in motion. Building Vanguard Wealth wasn't just my job, it was my life. Dad launched the firm when I was 18, fresh out of high school and eager to prove myself. While Ethan was off playing rugby at an elite college, I was learning the ropes from the ground up. Filing documents, making cold calls, chauffeuring Dad to client meetings in his old Toyota. By the time Ethan graduated and joined the firm, I'd already secured half our client base. Doctors who entrusted me with their settlement funds. Lawyers who let me handle their retirement portfolios. 3 prominent Boston families whose wealth traced back to the 19th century shipping trade. These weren't flashy tech moguls chasing quick wins. They were people who valued stability, trust, and steady returns that grew quietly over decades. Ethan always saw that as a weakness. "We're missing opportunities, Daniel," he'd say whenever I suggested a safe municipal bond over some speculative venture. "These trust fund heirs have millions sitting idle. We could triple their wealth in 5 years with the right bold moves." But I knew our clients. Dr. Elizabeth Carter didn't care about tripling her fortune. She wanted assurance that her retirement was secure and her son's law school tuition was covered. The Hawthorne Family Trust wasn't chasing explosive gains. They wanted to preserve capital that had weathered the Great Depression, 2 global wars, and the 2008 crash. That's where Ethan and I diverged. He saw dollar signs and growth metrics. I saw people. The rift became evident 6 months ago. Ethan started scheduling client meetings without me, pitching risky strategies that made me uneasy. He'd return from these discussions raving about crypto portfolios and hedge fund deals as if they were foolproof. When I pressed for specifics, he'd dismiss me with talk of modernizing the firm's vision. Then came the outside investors, 2 New Yorkers with flashy watches and guarded smiles. They'd sit in our boardroom discussing market disruption and aggressive growth plans while Ethan nodded eagerly. Dad seemed uneasy about them, but he was already talking retirement, and Ethan had convinced him these were the partners to elevate Vanguard Wealth. I noticed other shifts too. Conversations that stopped when I entered the room. Emails I wasn't included on. Documents that now needed only Ethan's signature when they once required both partners' approval. The morning he ended my partnership, I wasn't shocked. Disappointed, perhaps. Hurt that 23 years of collaboration meant so little to him, but not shocked. What did surprise me was the calm I felt leaving that building. I sat in my truck for an hour after Ethan dismissed me, not out of despair, but because I was strategizing. 23 years of client relationships don't belong to Vanguard Wealth Partners. They belong to the person who built them, nurtured them, and earned the trust that makes them possible. Ethan thought he was inheriting a client roster when he took over the firm. He was actually inheriting my reputation, my connections, and my integrity. That's when I knew what I had to do. 3 months earlier, during a routine review of our partnership agreements, I'd spotted a key detail, a clause tucked deep in the limited partner documentation. It allowed certain high-value clients to redirect their investments immediately if senior management changed. It was standard language, the kind of safeguard wealthy families demand when entrusting millions to a firm. Ethan hadn't bothered reading the fine print. Neither had his New York investors. They were too focused on their bold growth plans to care about contract details. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts. Dr. Carter, attorney William Gray from the Hawthorne Family Trust, Eleanor Prescott, who oversaw the Langley estate. 6 families, representing over $87 million in managed assets. 6 families who'd trusted me personally for over a decade. My first call was to Dr. Carter. Elizabeth, it's Daniel Vaughn. I'm calling about some management changes at the firm. I'd like to discuss your options under the partnership protection clause in your agreement. Her response was immediate. Are you leaving, Daniel? I've been asked to step down from my partnership role. Then I'm leaving too. What do I need to do? The call lasted 10 minutes. By the end, she'd committed to transferring her entire portfolio, $12 million, to whatever firm I launched next. The second call was to William Gray. Same conversation, same result. $15 million in trust assets, ready to move. By the time I drove home that evening, I'd made 6 calls and secured commitments for $87 million in transferred assets. Not a bad afternoon's work. The beauty was Ethan's timing. He'd ended my partnership on a Friday afternoon, likely planning to unveil his new vision for the firm on Monday. He didn't realize he'd given me a full weekend to execute the client notifications required by the protection clauses. By Monday, Vanguard Wealth would face a very different reality. I drove home to my wife, Sarah. She was in the kitchen when I walked in, and one look at my face told her something had shifted. How bad is it? She asked. Actually, I said, it might be very good. Monday morning arrived with the sharp October air that makes Boston feel vibrant. I was up at 5 a.m., sipping coffee and reviewing the legal documents I'd been preparing for months. By 7 a.m., I was at the office of Bennett and Partners, the law firm that had helped me incorporate Vaughn Advisory Group 2 months earlier. The paperwork was straightforward. 6 asset transfer requests, each one fully compliant with the partnership protection clauses Ethan hadn't bothered to study. $87 million would move from Vanguard Wealth to my new firm before Ethan even opened his office. I was home by 9 a.m. when my phone rang. Daniel, what the hell did you do? Ethan's voice was laced with panic. I exercised our client's contractual rights, I said. Something you might want to familiarize yourself with. You can't just steal our clients. I didn't steal anything. I informed them of their options under the management change provisions. They made their own choices. The line went silent for a moment. When Ethan spoke again, his tone was icy. You think you're clever, Daniel, but you've made a big mistake. Those clients signed contracts with Vanguard Wealth. We have legal grounds to block any transfers. Actually, you don't. I drafted most of those contracts, remember? I made sure the protection clauses were airtight. We'll see about that. I'm calling our lawyers. The call ended, and I knew Ethan was about to make his first major misstep as managing partner. Within an hour, he'd be meeting with high-priced attorneys, trying to find a way to reclaim the clients he'd lost. He'd burn thousands on legal fees, waste precious time, and ultimately learn what I already knew. The contracts were ironclad. But Ethan's real problem wasn't legal, it was financial. Vanguard Wealth operated on a management fee structure, earning 1.5% annually on all managed assets, plus performance bonuses on successful investments. With $87 million gone, Ethan had just lost over $1 million in yearly revenue. The 2 investors who'd backed his takeover wouldn't be pleased. My phone rang again around noon. This time, it wasn't Ethan. Daniel, it's Gerald. My father's voice was measured, but I could sense the strain beneath it. Dad, we need to talk. Can you come to the office? I don't think that's wise. Ethan made his stance clear on Friday. Ethan isn't driving this conversation, I am. I drove to the office, wondering what I'd face. The Vanguard Wealth Building. a restored brownstone in Boston's financial district, exuded the understated elegance that old money clients preferred over glitzy skyscrapers. I'd helped Dad pick this spot 15 years ago when we moved from the garage to our first proper office. The receptionist, Lisa, looked uneasy when I walked in. She'd been with us for 8 years and I could see the conflict in her eyes. "He's waiting in the boardroom," she said softly. I found Dad alone at the mahogany table where Ethan had ended my partnership 3 days earlier. He looked older than his 68 years, and I realized this ordeal was weighing on him. "Sit down, Daniel." I took the same chair I'd sat in on Friday, but the dynamic had shifted. Dad wasn't mediating between his sons anymore. He was fighting to save his company. "Ethan says you've stolen our clients." "Ethan says a lot of things. The question is whether you believe him." Dad studied me for a long moment. "What did you do?" "I gave 6 clients the information they needed to make informed decisions about their investments, information Ethan should have provided when he announced the management changes. They chose to follow me." Dad leaned back, and for the first time in months, he resembled the man who'd built this firm from scratch. "Tell me about these protection clauses," he said. I handed him a folder I'd brought. Inside were copies of the 6 contracts that had just cost Ethan $87 million. "Page 4, Section 12, I said, sliding Dr. Carter's contract across the table. "Standard wealth protection language that high-net-worth clients demand. If senior management changes, limited partners can reallocate their assets immediately without penalty." Dad put on his reading glasses and examined the document. I watched as he processed the implications. "You included this clause in every major contract." "Everyone. You taught me to prioritize our clients' interests, Dad. This is what that looks like." He closed the folder and looked at me with something like admiration. "Ethan doesn't know about these clauses, does he?" "Ethan doesn't read contracts. He signs them and moves on to the next deal." "But you've been planning this for months." "I've been preparing for this possibility since Ethan brought in the investors. When you announced your retirement, I saw it coming." Dad was silent, digesting my words. When he spoke again, his tone had changed. "There's something you need to know about those investors," he said. "Something Ethan hasn't told you." I waited. "They didn't just want a stake in Vanguard Wealth. They wanted to buy us out completely. The plan was to leverage our client relationships to fuel a much larger investment fund. Ethan convinced them to start with a partnership, but their goal was always a full acquisition." The pieces clicked into place. Ethan's aggressive expansion plans, the meetings I was excluded from, the rush to overhaul the firm's investment approach. "They were never planning to keep me," I said. "Ethan convinced them you'd be a liability. Too cautious, too tied to tradition. They wanted someone who could deliver the growth numbers to justify their investment. And now," Dad almost smiled, "now they're staring at a firm that lost 60% of its managed assets in one morning. The growth projections Ethan promised are impossible." I understood why Dad had called this meeting. It wasn't about family harmony or bringing me back. It was about survival. "What are you asking me, Dad?" "I'm asking what it would take for you to consider returning those clients to Vanguard Wealth. Under Ethan's leadership, nothing. What about under different leadership?" I studied his face, searching for the angle I knew was there. "The investors have an escape clause," Dad continued. "If the firm misses certain performance targets in the first quarter, they can pull their investment and dissolve the partnership. Ethan doesn't know about this clause. It was added after he signed the agreement. You're planning to push them out. I'm planning to give them a reason to leave willingly. The question is whether you'd be open to rebuilding what we started." I thought about the 6 calls I'd made on Friday. The trust those clients placed in me, not in the Vanguard Wealth name, the new firm I'd already incorporated, the office space I'd leased. "I appreciate the offer, Dad, but I think it's too late for that." His expression showed he'd anticipated my response. "Then I guess we'll see what happens next." 1 week after Ethan ended my partnership on a Friday morning, I was in my new office with a view of Boston Harbor when my assistant tapped on the door. "Mr. Vaughn, someone's here to see you. Says his name is Ethan." I found my brother in the reception area looking like he hadn't slept in days. His costly suit was creased, his tie loosened. The self-assurance he'd exuded a week ago had vanished. "Daniel, we need to talk." I guided him into my office, noticing how he scanned the harbor view, the oak desk, the client photos already adorning the walls. Vaughn Advisory Group appeared more prosperous in its first week than Vanguard Wealth had in its final year. "Nice place," he said, but there was no warmth in his tone. "What can I do for you, Ethan?" He sank into the chair across from my desk, shoulders slumped. I need those clients back. Which clients are we talking about? Don't toy with me, Daniel. You know who Dr. Carter, the Hawthorns, the Langleys, all of them. Those clients made their own choices based on information they were legally entitled to. The investors walked away yesterday. Without them, I can't cover expenses. The firm's bleeding cash. I studied my brother's face, seeing something new, raw fear. What exactly are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to return as senior partner. We can rebuild this together. Under whose leadership? Ethan's jaw clenched. Mine, I'm managing partner now. Then you've got everything you wanted. What's the issue? The issue is I can't run a firm without clients, and the clients followed you. I leaned back, letting the silence linger. Through the window, I could see the harbor where Boston's merchant dynasties had amassed their wealth centuries ago. Old money, steady money, the kind that prized trust over fast profits. You ended my partnership because you said finance demands bold personalities, I said at last. You were right about that. So you'll consider coming back? No, Ethan. I'm saying you're about to find out just how bold I can be. The Vanguard Wealth Partners building was listed for sale the next month. Ethan tried to keep the firm afloat with the remaining clients, but the math didn't add up. Without the consistent income from long-term wealth management agreements, he couldn't sustain the costs of a financial district office and a full team. Dad called me when Ethan finally conceded defeat. He's closing it down, Dad said. 25 years and it's done. I'm sorry it came to this. Are you? I pondered his question. Was I sorry my brother had dismantled the company our family built? Yes. Was I sorry he'd learned that choices have consequences? No. I'm sorry Ethan couldn't see beyond his own ambition, I said finally. What about you? Any regrets? I glanced around my office at Vaughn Advisory Group. 6 months after launching, we were overseeing more than $130 million in assets. 3 senior staff from Vanguard Wealth had joined us, along with 2 junior analysts fed up with Ethan's erratic leadership. We'd outgrown our initial space and were planning a move to a larger office. No regrets, Dad. This is what I should have done years ago. 2 weeks later, a package arrived in the mail with no return address. Inside was a photo from the Vanguard Wealth Christmas party 3 years prior. Ethan and I stood behind Dad, all 3 of us grinning at the camera. On the back, someone had written, "Before everything fell apart." I stared at that photo for a long time, recalling the person Ethan was before ambition clouded his judgment. Then I tucked it into my desk drawer. Some bridges once burned can't be rebuilt. And sometimes that's exactly what needs to happen. The past was behind me now and the future looked strikingly clear. Building something with integrity takes time, but ruining it with arrogance happens remarkably fast.